The immaterium roiled with colors beyond mortal comprehension, tides of unreality colliding with each other like clashing tsunamis of memory and possibility. At the edge of that churning cosmos, a wound opened where no wound had been. Foulfell, the prison mirror that held the vilest of demon kind, was being pierced from within. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. Those who had been confined there faced reflections that twisted their sins back upon them until madness broke down to gibbering submission. One marauder never bowed. Terrorblade had spent ages in that mirrored cage mastering the fury and deceit of his own image. He turned the torment into training, binding the fragments of his mirrored soul into a weapon. When he slipped between frames of existence, the mirrored shards followed him, not as torment but as obedient echoes. The breach he tore through Foulfell was not a simple tear, it was a bridge between incompatible cosmoses. On one side, the swirling, fractal nightmare of Dota's plains, full of eldworm souls and forgotten gods. On the other side, a sea of raw chaos older still. It whispered with the voices of uncounted mortals, each cry a prayer or curse. It crackled with the hatred of ancient powers named Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh. Terrorblade felt the warp's breath like cold fire along the edges of his essence. It attempted to read him, to categorize him as demon or demon, to assign him a place in its hierarchy of damnation. He refused. The reflection he had mastered interposed itself, absorbing the warp's inquisitive touch. It showed back to the immaterium an image so multifaceted that the gods of the warping sea could not hold it. They saw an outlaw who had stolen from other demons, a marauder whose crimes broke the rules of infernal society. They saw the mirror inside him devouring any attempt to define him. They recoiled. He reached out with senses honed by millennia of predation and found an opening in the storm. Through that aperture, physical matter existed: stars, shipwrecks, shattered planets. A world hung near the opening like an iron fruit, surrounded by rings of debris. Golden statues and crumbling manufactorum chimneys jutted through clouds of soot. He could taste the souls of billions compressed into hive blocks, their terror and piety mixing into a tangy wine. He stepped. There was no dramatic flourish, no explosion of light, only a ripple as his form, wreathed in shifting shadows, moved from one reality into another. The immaterium clung to him like tar for a moment, then slid off as the mirror within him flared. Terrorblade landed on a ledge of cracked rockcrete under a sky the color of dried blood. Firestorms raged across distant horizons. The reek of promethium, ozone, and burning flesh filled his nostrils. He inhaled slowly, savoring this new flavor of despair. Each soul on this world was a possible piece in his greater design. He had no need to rush. He glanced back only once. Foulfell's mirror was already healing the tear, his own reflection returning a cold smile before dissolving. That other self had been teacher and opponent. Now it whispered with calm certainty, reminding him of his purpose, to take souls and reshape creation. The absence of eldworms here did not deter him. The warp held other prizes, ancient souls of primarchs, demon princes, perhaps even the slumbering spirit of an emperor whose light had dimmed. He stepped away from the closing tier and let the storm swallow his previous life. The universe changed from the fractured brilliance of Foulfell to the oppressive gloom of the 41st millennium. The transition left no marks, only the faint smell of ozone and a lingering sense that something unwanted had slipped through the cracks. His eyes adjusted to iron towers and polluted sky. In the whispers of the warp, names floated like debris: Morsha's Prime, Hive Dominus, Golden Throne. He tasted each name like a promise as ash drifted across his armor, and he moved deeper into the heart of a dead empire. Smoke rose from manufactorum chimneys to mix with clouds thick as stone. The world he had chosen for his entry was named Morsha's Prime in local tongues. It lay in the Ghoul sector, a place known for constant war and the kind of suffering that fed demon gods. Hive towers punched holes in the smog, each an arcology housing millions. Their sides were encrusted with habitation stacks, rusted balconies, and statues of saints whose features had been worn smooth by centuries of acid rain. At their bases stretched oceans of scrap and slag, where the lowest caste scraped out lives among mutated rodents and toxic runoff. Every piece of architecture was both functional and baroque, carrying skull motifs and imperial eagles, as if the people needed constant reminders of the death that awaited them for disobedience. From some balconies, he could see faith banners fluttering, rags embroidered with the emperor's image, cracked aquilas carved into stone. The presence of the corpse king of mankind hung thick in the air like incense. To an outsider, it was both oppressive and curiously vulnerable. Terrorblade moved through this landscape as a shadow made solid. Mortals passed near him without noticing. Their eyes slid off his form as if he were a glitch in reality. Where he walked, footsteps left faint impressions not in the ground but in the warp currents themselves. He did not rush. Predators who rushed wasted energy. He was a hunter of immortal souls. The souls here tasted different from those he knew. They carried the bitterness of fanaticism and the spice of suppressed rebellion. They belonged to soldiers who marched because they must, to laborers who worked because to stop meant death, to nobles who schemed in their spires, imagining themselves distant from the suffering below. Each was a piece of a vast machine called the Imperium, a machine he recognized from stories whispered through the warp. It was a stagnating beast that consumed its own children to sustain a decrepit god. He admired its brutal efficiency, even as he planned how to exploit its weakness. As he moved deeper into hive-dominous lower levels, he passed through markets where mutants and humans traded scrap for water. Servoskulls drifted overhead, their optics scanning for signs of heresy. Vox speakers blared litanies from priests extolling the emperor's sacrifices. In the distance, artillery thundered as imperial guard batteries fired at some unseen enemy. The rhythm of this world was war. It was not war for conquest, but war to maintain a status quo that had calcified over 10,000 years. His presence here was an infection, a variable that had not been accounted for. He relished the thought. At one intersection, he paused to watch a procession of shackled convicts flanked by robed Mechanicus priests and Skiddarite guards. Their souls were layered with code and prayer, more machine than man. He noted them as potential tools rather than threats and moved on. He let the procession pass and continued toward a gap between two ancient hab blocks. The alley led into the true heart of the lower hive, an industrial canyon where molten metal flowed in channels and enormous cogitators hummed with secret data. Here the air was filled with the scent of oil, smoke, and blood. Servitors moved along tracks, their flesh grafted to machinery, blank faces turned upward as if seeking absolution. Above them, banners hung from chains with inscriptions in high Gothic. He brushed his fingers against one such banner, feeling the raised stitches of a prayer. The words invoked protection from demons. He smiled at the irony and kept moving. The souls here were like seeds ready to be harvested. He would water them with fear and watch as the warp's tendrils infiltrated their hearts. The path he followed sloped downward, leading him to a subterranean platform where the echo of a deeper machine pulsed through the walls. In the distance, he could sense a concentration of psychic energy. Something was happening beneath the hive that would require his attention, but he did not yet know whether it would be a threat or an opportunity. With calm certainty, he stepped through a doorway carved from rockcrete and disappeared into shadows, the iron spires above fading from view. Descending into the bowels of Hive Dominus, Terrorblade felt the temperature drop. The oppressive heat of the upper manufactorums gave way to a damp chill. Pipes dripped condensed water onto rusted grates. The walls here were close and lined with thick cables carrying power to arcane machines deeper still. In the dimness, he allowed himself to remember. Foulfell had been his crucible and his torment. There in that mirror dimension, each demon faced its own reflection, forced to confront every lie, every cruelty, every betrayal. Demons who had preyed on lesser beings were devoured by their inverted selves. Those who had ruled through terror found themselves subordinate to fear made flesh. Terrorblade, the outlaw who had stolen from fellow demons, had been expected to suffer. Instead, he learned. The reflection he met was not an enemy but a teacher. In its eyes, he saw his own potential for cruelty and creation. He mastered that reflection rather than be mastered by it. He learned that identity was not fixed, but a blade to be honed. With each confrontation, he forged his soul into something that could not be bound by simple categories like demon or demon. In the quiet of the hive's underbelly, he called upon that reflection. Not physically, he did not conjure his mirrored double, but he invited the presence of his internal mirror to the forefront of his mind. It whispered to him, a voice that was his and not his. It reminded him of his purpose. The eldworm souls he had once pursued had been sources of immense power, necessary to reshape his original plane. Here, there were no dragon souls. Instead, there were entities of a different order, primarchs whose genetic legacy shaped entire legions, demon princes whose existence spanned millennia, and an emperor whose psychic presence maintained a light across the warp. Their souls, if captured, could form a lattice strong enough to warp reality. His reflection suggested patience. He had just arrived in this galaxy. He needed to understand its currents. The mirror's calm certainty steadied him. In Foulfell, he had learned to resist the lure of immediate gratification. Power was sweeter when taken slowly, like pulling a thread that unraveled an entire tapestry. His thoughts drifted to the difference between Foulfell and the realm he now traversed. Foulfell's mirror forced self-awareness. The warp's mirror was externally focused. It reflected not the self but the desires and fears of billions. It magnified them into gods. Chaos was not a force of introspection. It was a scream of want. The reflection within him allowed him to navigate those screams without losing his own voice. When the warp whispered temptations, promising him a seat among the dark gods, he answered with his own question. What use had he for another's throne when he sought to build his own? The warp recoiled, unsettled by a being who did not seek its favor. Beyond the psychic relay lay a series of tunnels lit by flickering lumen globes. The conduits here were not built for human traffic. They were the arteries of the hive, carrying power and waste. Yet they also served as secret passages for those who needed to move unseen. Terrorblade followed a faint current of warp-touched air, guiding him toward a node of potential conflict. The sound of chanting grew louder, not the monotonous binharic of tech priests, but the fervent voices of human zealots. He emerged into a cavernous vault where a congregation of the Adeptus Ministorum had gathered. Rows of pews carved from dark wood faced an altar draped with gold cloth. Behind it rose a statue of the emperor, 20 meters tall, depicted as a serene warrior with outstretched hands. Candles burned in niches along the walls, casting long shadows. Incense smoke curled toward the ceiling, carrying with it the scent of burnt spices and human fat. At the altar, a priest in crimson robes spoke with fervor. He wore a vox amplifier around his neck, his voice echoing through the chamber. He spoke of sacrifice, of duty, of the emperor's vigilance. His words were laced with fear. He spoke of warp storms growing stronger, of chaos incursions ravaging nearby worlds. His congregation listened with eyes wide, some nodding, others silently weeping. Their faith was absolute and desperate. They had no hope of reprieve except through the emperor's grace. Terrorblade stood at the edge of the assembly, unseen. He listened with interest. This emperor, bound to his throne for 10,000 years, ruled through faith and fear. His priests wielded words like weapons. They kept billions obedient. Their faith was a chain that bound the Imperium together. Chains could be severed. Faith could be redirected. His gaze wandered from the priest to the congregation. He studied the souls in the room, each like a candle flame in the warp. Some burned bright with zeal. Others flickered with doubt. One woman in the back clutched a child to her chest. Her mind was filled with fear not of demons, but of starvation. A man near the front held Allah's pistol beneath his cloak, ready to protect his family from marauders. He had killed before. His soul was already stained. Terrorblade filed away these observations. In his own realm, he had manipulated demons by preying on their vices. Here, he would manipulate mortals by understanding their fears and hopes. He could offer them solutions. The priest spoke of an emperor who demanded sacrifice. Terrorblade could promise liberation, albeit with a price. The warp gods offered excess, change, disease, or violence. He would offer purpose, the chance to reshape reality rather than be ground beneath it. He moved through the crowd like a whisper, the congregation unaware of the shadow that brushed against their souls. As he passed, he drew small strands of essence from certain individuals. He did not take enough to kill, only enough to taste. Each strand gave him information. The soldier in the front row had seen a demon engine tear apart his squad. His fear of chaos ran deep. He would be easy to sway against the Imperium if promised revenge. The mother's love for her child was a tether. Threaten it, and she would do anything. The priest's faith was brittle. Behind his fervor lay exhaustion. Terrorblade smiled inwardly. Foulfell had taught him that souls were tools. Here, he found an abundance of them. As he moved deeper into the hive, the environment shifted again. The polished floors of the chapel gave way to grime-covered metal grates. He could hear the clang of machinery, the hum of generators. He smelled ozone and hot oil. The Adeptus Mechanicus district was near. The machine cult's rituals fascinated him. They revered technology as if it possessed souls of its own. In a way, it did. The warp touched all things. Even circuits carried echoes of human emotions. Machine spirits were not conscious as mortals were, but they were reactive. They responded to respect, to anger, to fear. Tech priests stroked cables as if soothing snakes. They whispered binaric prayers into Vox slots. They used incense to cleanse reactors. In their reverence, Terrorblade sensed an opportunity. Foulfell had no machines, only magic. Here, technology could become a vector for his power. He just needed to understand how the Mechanicus controlled it. With that thought, he stepped into the hum of giant turbines. The voices of the congregation faded behind him, replaced by the low chant of tech priests. His reflection whispered of circuits and souls intertwining. He listened. The hive around him pulsed like a living thing, and he intended to learn its rhythm. The corridor opened onto a vast manufactorum hall where machinery thundered without pause. Amidst the controlled chaos, squads of Imperial guardsmen moved in formation, uniforms stained with oil and blood. The halls still showed bullet holes and burnt promethium from a recent chaos incursion. Servitors dragged away corpses while guardsmen glanced at shadows, expecting something else to emerge. Terrorblade observed them from an overhead platform. These soldiers were not space marines. They were humans, fragile in their meat and bone, yet their souls burned with surprising resilience. Each had witnessed horrors that would have driven lesser beings to madness. Many had already lost limbs and comrades. They clung to each other and to the belief that their sacrifices mattered. He admired their tenacity even as he considered them prey. His arrival had been silent. No one had marked the ripple as he crossed realities. Now, as he prepared to reveal himself, he summoned the power of his reflection. Shadows lengthened behind him, coalescing into shapes that mirrored his form. Illusions, but with substance enough to confuse the eye. These clones stepped out onto other platforms, each moving with the same fluid grace. They would act as decoys, drawing fire and sowing confusion. He leaped from the platform, landing on the manufactory floor with the grace of a predator. The metal floor rang under his impact, audible even over the machinery. A sergeant shouted and leveled his Law's rifle. His squad followed suit, weapons snapping up in unison. They saw a towering figure clad in armor unlike anything in their lexicanums, skin like black metal, eyes burning with unnatural light. Their training told them this was a demon. They fired. Law's bolt stabbed through the air toward him. The first bolt struck his shoulder, leaving a scorch mark. The second passed through a clone, causing it to flicker and dissolve. The sight of the disintegrating doppelganger gave the guardsmen pause, but their sergeant barked another order, and they continued firing. He moved before the next volley, severing rifles and bayonets with efficient swings. The blade he carried hummed with latent energy as it carved through armor. Souls popped free and he drew them in. Some he spared, enjoying the taste of their fear and the knowledge that bullets could not harm him. A sergeant lunged at him with a combat blade. Instead of killing the man, he parried and looked into his soul, saw duty and resentment intertwined. With a mental whisper, he planted doubt and let the man fall wounded but alive. Alarms blared as more guardsmen poured into the hall. Vox channels crackled with orders. A heavy bolter set up on a tripod spat mass reactive shells at his clones, shredding them. He sensed their dissolution like the snapping of strings. It did not matter. He did not need them to survive. They had drawn enough attention. He rolled behind a stack of adamantine plates as a missile impacted nearby, showering him with shrapnel that bounced harmlessly off his skin. He laughed softly. It had been some time since he had felt the raw adrenaline of a direct fight. In Falfell, battles were waged in the mind. Here, the stakes were physical. He enjoyed the contrast. Alarms blared as reinforcements rushed in, heavy bolters thudding and missiles whistling. He did not linger in his metamorph form for long. With a flex of power, wings unfurled and horns sprouted, a brief glimpse of the monster within. The sight was enough to scatter heavy weapons teams and send a cold wave of despair through their ranks. He cut through those who stood, shoved others aside, and left some alive on purpose, whispering into their minds to remember this moment. Within minutes, the hall fell silent except for machinery. He reverted to his humanoid shape, steam rising from his armor. Without further slaughter, he slipped back into the shadows. The survivors would carry his words like seeds of doubt, and the rhythm of war resumed as officers screamed for reinforcements. He moved on, satisfied with the taste of imperial blood and the lingering unease he had sown. In the aftermath of slaughter, the warp pressed closer. It flowed through the shattered manufactorum like smoke-seeking cracks. Voices rode those currents, ancient and seductive. They hissed promises that had ensnared legions of mortals and immortals alike. Terrorblade paused in a side tunnel, senses attuned to the vibrations of the immaterium. The voices were distinct yet blended into a chorus. A call to violence came from a realm of brass and blood. A whisper of change and boundless knowledge slithered from a labyrinth of eyes. A sigh of decay drifted from a garden where flesh rotted and rebirthed. A breath of ecstasy rose like perfume from endless feasts of sensation. These were the gods of chaos, the warp's highest reflections of mortal extremes. They had noticed the intrusion from Falfell. They wanted to know whether this stranger could be a pawn or a rival. One by one, the gods of the warp sent visions. Rage offered endless skulls, change whispered secrets, rot promised endurance, and excess offered pleasure. He listened, recognized the bait in each, and refused them all. He would not trade one master for another, nor drown his ambition in slaughter, stagnation, or sensation. The voices receded when they found no purchase. The chorus of gods spoke again, this time with something akin to respect. Here was a being who would not bow. They could not easily categorize him. He was not of the warp, yet he walked through it as if born there. He was a demon, yet not a demon. They withdrew slightly, but they did not forget him. They would watch him with interest, ready to intervene when his actions aligned with their interests. Terrorblade understood the game. He would use their blind spots against them. By refusing, he had positioned himself outside their web, free to move unpredictably. His reflection agreed. It whispered of patience. Every god has a weakness: pride, jealousy, boredom. He would find those cracks and pry them open when it suited him. For now, he continued through the tunnel. The voices faded to a background murmur. He emerged into a chamber where Mechanicus machinery sang in binary. The Adeptus Mechanicus had not yet discovered the intrusion into their manufactorum. He took advantage of their distraction to examine the machines more closely. Each had a spirit, a resonance in the warp. He touched a plasma generator. It hummed in response, recognizing the presence of a powerful entity. He murmured in a language of his own, not binaric, but a combination of Falfell's syllables and warp resonance. The machine responded by lowering its electromagnetic field. This communion was not something the Mechanicus would approve of. He smiled. The warp had its own machine spirits, and he could speak to them directly. He filed away the knowledge. In time, he might awaken machines to his cause. He left the chamber, leaving behind only a slight fluctuation in power output that a tech priest would later attribute to random variance. The whispers of the chaos gods were gone, replaced by the steady thrum of engines and the calm certainty of his reflection. The game had begun, and he had declined his first round of temptations. He felt a quiet satisfaction. Control was his greatest strength, and he had just exercised it. The heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus district was a labyrinth of pipes, catwalks, and cogitator banks. Red-robed figures moved through this maze with purpose, their bodies augmented with mechadendrites and implants. They spoke in binaric bursts, exchanging data faster than human speech. The largest chamber housed an assembly line for chimera transports. Tracks moved chassis along while servitors welded armor plates and inserted engine blocks. The process was precise and ritualized, each step accompanied by prayers to the Omnissiah. Any deviation was considered heresy. Terrorblade watched from a shadowed alcove, considering how he could turn this place to his advantage. He needed information and perhaps a piece of technology that would allow him to traverse the Imperium without constant interference. He also needed to sow doubt among the tech priests. An idea came. He reached inward and pulled at his reflection, drawing forth a new layer of illusion. This time his clones did not take his form. They took the shapes of robed tech priests, complete with cog glyphs and incense burners. He studied their movements through the reflection and then sent them into the chamber. The clones walked stiffly, their mechadendrites swaying, their hands clasped in prayer. The real tech priests glanced at them and nodded in greeting, seeing colleagues. The clones approached a cogitator bank and began inputting data. Numbers scrolled across screens. A junior Magos looked up, confused by the sudden request for a new machine spirit calibration. He bent to examine the data. It contained subtle corruption, a line of code that altered output tolerances by a fraction, nothing overt. The engine would hum a slightly different note. A machine spirit would become restless. Meanwhile, Terrorblade moved among the catwalks unseen. He approached a containment vault marked with sigils of protection. Inside were stored STC patterns and relic weapons from the Great Crusade. A tech priest and his servitors guarded the vault. He observed their routines, noted the codes they used. When the guard turned away to adjust a servo arm, he slipped forward and placed his hand upon the vault's door. His reflection pulsed. For a moment, he saw through the material. Within, he glimpsed the silhouettes of devices, a melta charge, a power fist, a relic that emitted a faint psychic hum. He pressed deeper, his essence sliding into the lock's mechanism. The machine spirit hesitated, sensing an intruder. He whispered in its language, offering respect, promising freedom. The spirit relented. The lock clicked. The door opened a fraction. He reached inside and withdrew a small device, a teleport Homer inscribed with Martian runes. Its function was to mark locations for precise teleportation. This would allow him to redirect his clones or himself through the warp with accuracy. He closed the vault quietly. The guard noticed nothing, distracted by a data spike caused by his corrupted code. He exited the Mechanicus district with his stolen device hidden beneath his armor. He had learned the cadence of binary prayer and the vulnerabilities of machine spirits. He had planted doubt among those who served the Omnissiah. It was enough for now. Above ground, he could hear distant explosions. Chaos forces were attempting a counterattack somewhere in the hive. The Imperium responded with artillery and faith. He followed a maintenance tunnel upward. As he climbed, he felt a shift in the warp. A mind brushed against his, a mind ancient and disciplined. It was not human. Its thoughts were like silver threads woven into patterns of past and future. And Eldar was near. He paused, curious. Eldar were Xenos, despised by the Imperium and hunted by chaos. Their souls were potent, filled with emotion and memory. Their seers glimpsed possible futures. Capturing such a soul would be valuable. He adjusted his course and moved toward the psychic presence. The tunnel opened onto an abandoned transit station. its walls covered in peeling propaganda posters. In the center stood a robed figure with elongated features, a helm shaped like a swooping hawk's beak. An Eldar farseer waited, staff in hand. She had come through hidden paths to meet this interloper. He stepped into the station, the stolen teleport Homer warm against his skin. The confrontation that followed would not be violent in the ordinary sense. It would be a duel of wills and visions. He felt his reflection stir, ready to absorb this alien's knowledge or devour her essence. The scene was set. The Eldar farseer stood like a painting sprung to life, her robes of shimmering wraithbone flowing around her as if moved by winds that did not exist. Her helm masked most of her features, but her eyes glowed through the visor, bright and ancient. Lines of runes traced along her staff, pulsing faintly. She regarded Terrorblade with caution tempered by curiosity. To Eldar seers, time was a web. Each strand represented a possible outcome. They walked that web with agility, avoiding strands that led to destruction. She had seen a strand of destiny in which a demon from another reality tore holes through the Imperium's fabric. She had followed that strand and found him. She raised her staff, not as a weapon but as a conduit. Through it flowed images and words that crossed language barriers. She projected a warning, showing him how the warp here was a sea of spite and madness, and how her dying race clung to craftworlds to avoid the gods' hunger. She offered knowledge, hinting at predators like tyrannids and ancient tomb worlds and laughing greenskins, and she cautioned that reckless action would draw enemies even he could not ignore. He listened, allowing her images to flow into his mind. He saw craftworlds adrift in space like islands in a storm, their hulls singing ghostly songs. He saw Ildari souls bound in spirit stones, trapped to avoid Slaanesh's hunger. He saw the webway, a labyrinth of safe paths through the warp. He understood that the Eldar had knowledge of routes that bypassed warp storms and imperial blockades. He also understood that their souls were among the most prized by Slaanesh. They lived with constant fear that their essence would be devoured by the Prince of Pleasure. The Farseer projected the desire for survival. She asked him to leave the Eldar alone, or, if he must take souls, to focus on those already claimed by chaos. Her argument was laced with desperation and pride. She did not beg, she reasoned. Terrorblade considered. He could kill her easily and take her soul. The reflection within him hungered. Eldar souls were potent, a feast for demonkind, yet the Farseer's knowledge was also valuable. She had seen strands of fate that he had not. She could guide him along paths that would avoid immediate entanglement with the Imperium's vast apparatus or the Chaos God's direct gaze. He extended his consciousness toward hers. Their minds touched. He felt her fear, her grief for a dying race, her stubborn will. She felt his hunger, his ambition, and something unexpected, a sense of honor twisted by demonic pragmatism. He spoke without words. He would not slaughter without purpose, he conveyed. Give me a path that leads to the souls I seek, and I will leave your craftworlds unmolested for now. She hesitated. Eldar deals with demons were dangerous. Yet she saw a strand where his path diverted a chaos fleet from a craftworld, saving thousands of Eldar lives. Another strand showed him killing an inquisitor who would otherwise have discovered a concealed exodite world. Her duty to her people urged her to choose the lesser evil. She extended her staff. Runes glowed brighter. She imparted a map of webway entrances hidden in the ghoul sector. She revealed the location of a cache where a fragment of a Primarch's essence had been hidden by a cabal of conspirators. It was a trap they had laid for a demon prince. It could be repurposed by someone like Terrorblade. In exchange, she asked for time. Time for her craftworld to flee deeper into the webway. Time for her kin to prepare wards. Time for them to survive another day. He agreed in his way. He would not hunt Eldar souls until he had used this information. After that, all souls were equal. It was not a promise of eternal protection. He made no such vows. The Farseer accepted, knowing the precarious nature of bargains with demons. She turned to leave, her robes swirling. He let her go. As she stepped into a shimmering portal that opened beside her, he extended a tendril of his power and lightly brushed her spirit stone. He marked it. When the time came, he would find her again. A soft handoff concluded their meeting. The farseer disappeared into the webway, and the portal snapped shut. The abandoned station became silent once more, save for the distant rumble of war. He held in his mind a new network of paths and a hint at where to find the first Primarch soul. The hunt widened, and he felt a thrill at the prospect. While Terrorblade bargained with an Eldar, the Imperium's agents were not idle. Inquisitorial sensors had picked up anomalies in Hive Dominus. Reports of a black-armored figure who deflected Law's bolts with ease reached the vox lines of an Ordo Hereticus cell. Data from the Adeptus Mechanicus showed minor code corruption at a manufactorum, traced to non-existent adepts. The Imperial Guard posted rumors of a whisper that promised liberation from a corpse god. Patterns coalesced under Inquisitor Enoch's gaze. He was a man molded by doctrine and personal conviction, a hunter of psychers and heretics who measured the worth of souls by their utility to the Emperor. The reports disturbed him. Daemonic incursions were typically loud and chaotic. This one was precise, surgical. A predator that hunted men and ideas alike. He mobilized. Enoch assembled a kill team drawn from stormtroopers and sanctioned psychers. They descended into the hive, following psychic residue and recordings. They interrogated survivors who spoke of a voice in their minds. Each piece painted a picture of a demon who used deception and subtlety. Enoch decided on caution and planned a targeted purge. Terrorblade sensed the Inquisitors approach long before the kill team entered his vicinity. The warp vibrated with the psychic pressure of sanctioned psychers focusing their minds. The air grew tense. He stood on a balcony overlooking a pumping station, his stolen teleport homer humming faintly. He considered confronting them. That would announce his presence more loudly than he wished. He considered fleeing deeper into the hive. That would cede control of his narrative. He chose a third path. He would let them see a shadow, not the substance. He summoned clones, more refined than the ones he had used against the guardsmen. These duplicates looked less like demons and more like humans with dark armor and pale eyes. They whispered prayers to the Emperor just loud enough for the inquisitorial vox to pick up. They moved away from his true position, leaving a trail of subtle warp signature. Inquisitor Enoch's psychers picked up the echo. They urged their stormtroopers down a different corridor. The clones led them through a maze of pipes and abandoned hab units. Along the way, they found evidence of minor heretical activities, mutant gatherings, forbidden texts. Enoch ordered purges on the spot. Fires burned, screams echoed. Souls slipped into the warp. Terrorblade watched from a distance, his true form cloaked. The Inquisitor was thorough, righteous in his way. He cut out weeds without seeing the root. Eventually, the kill team cornered one of the clones. The clone turned and looked Enoch in the eyes. Its gaze was empty, a perfect mimicry of faith drained. It spoke in a voice that was and was not Enoch's. The Emperor's light dims, it said calmly. Will you die with it? Then it dissolved into smoke. The psychers cried out as the clone's dissolution released a burst of psychic static. Enoch staggered but did not fall. He ordered his team to spread out to find the source. Terrorblade retreated through a maintenance hatch, leaving the Inquisitor to chase phantoms. He did not fear Enoch's wrath. He respected his skill. There was a part of him that considered capturing the Inquisitor's soul. Such a soul, so steeped in conviction, would be strong, but not yet. Enoch's pursuit served a purpose. By directing the kill team through mutant hideouts and cult cells, he triggered purges that would destabilize local power structures. The Inquisitor would expend resources and time hunting him in circles. Meanwhile, he would move toward his real objective, the hidden cache mentioned by the Farseer. He thought of the Primarch fragment waiting in some forgotten vault, surrounded by wards meant for demonic entities. He smiled. Wards that targeted demons might not anticipate something like him. He shifted into the shadows, leaving behind only a lingering question in Inquisitor Enoch's mind. In times of chaos, what differentiates zeal from heresy? The question would gnaw at the man in the quiet hours. It was a small wound, and small wounds sometimes festered. The hidden cache lay beneath an old administratum archive. Once this vault had stored planetary tithing records and census data. Now it was forgotten, sealed off during a structural collapse and left to gather dust. Its isolation made it ideal for a conspiracy seeking to entrap a demon. The Farseer's map led Terrorblade through access shafts and half-collapsed corridors. He emerged into a cavernous room lined with shelves of data slates and parchment scrolls. In the center stood a circle of black stone inscribed with runes of binding. Candles burned around it, their wax melted into dried blood. Chains suspended from the ceiling held bits of bone and pendants carved with wards. At the heart of the circle lay a small casket of wraithbone, its surface carved with sigils of both Eldar and human origin. The air vibrated with static. The trap was still active. He approached, careful not to disturb the outer circle. The runes glowed as he drew near, reacting to his demonic essence. They were designed to bind demons of the warp, using holy symbols and complex geometry to immobilize and contain. He studied them. They were potent but specific. They targeted entities aligned with the chaos gods. He was not aligned. His reflection had prepared him. He took a step forward, crossing the circle. The runes flared, then flickered. They tried to latch onto his essence and slid off, unable to find purchase. He walked calmly to the casket and lifted it. It was heavier than it looked, its mass not entirely physical. He opened it. Inside lay a shard of bone the length of a finger. It radiated a faint golden light. It pulsed like a heartbeat. In it he sensed the echo of a soul that had once commanded armies and wrestled gods. It was a fragment of a Primarch, a gene-engineered son of the Emperor, long dead or missing. Which one he could not tell from the fragment alone, but even this sliver contained vast potential. It thrummed with loyalty and fury, honor and tragedy. As he held it, souls began to gather. They did not come willingly. They were drawn by the Primarch's call. Spirits of dead guardsmen, echoes of long-fallen Astartes, even faint echoes of civilians swept up in war drifted toward the shard. They brushed against Terrorblade's essence. He opened himself and let them flow through, harvesting their energy. Each soul was like a note in a chord. Together, they resonated. His metamorph form twitched. He could feel his power swelling. The Primarch shard acted like a magnet, pulling loose souls from the hive's many graves. For a moment, he saw the potential. If he gathered enough of these fragments, he could create a symphony of souls that might rival the Emperor's own psychic beacon. He would not need to kill in battle. He could harvest the dead. The trap's secondary mechanism activated. The candles flared and the runes changed. They began to pull at his essence, not to bind but to drain. Someone had thought a trap might not catch a demon but might at least feed on his power. He smiled. He let them pull. Power streamed from him into the circle, then looped back through his reflection. The runes overloaded. Sigils cracked. A chain snapped and fell. The circle collapsed inward, its binding etched lines glowing white, then going dark. The power that had been drawn from him returned, amplified by the broken ritual. He felt a surge. His metamorph form's horns lengthened. His wings shimmered. The Primarch shard pulsed in his hand like a second heart. He closed the casket and slipped it into a void within his armor. It would remain safe until he decided to use it. He exited the archive, stepping over collapsed shelves and broken data slates. On his way out, he passed a skeleton wearing administratum robes. Its hand clutched a quill. He paused and touched the skull. Its soul had long since departed, but a residue remained, a sense of duty unfulfilled, of numbers unbalanced. He whispered a thought promising freedom. The residue flickered and faded. It cost him nothing, and it felt appropriate. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder. Two forces had collided in a hab block above. He moved toward the noise. Harvesting the dead through the Primarch shard was efficient, but there was still satisfaction in direct harvesting. He would continue to feed. As he climbed, he saw flames licking through broken windows, heard the roar of heavy bolters, and smelled cordite and burning flesh. He smiled. The harvest was ripe. After harvesting souls from the battle above, Terrorblade found a quiet alcove to examine the Primarch shard more closely. He withdrew it from the casket and held it in his palm. The golden light emanating from the bone fragment cast long shadows on the rockcrete wall. He focused his mind and let his consciousness sink into the shard. For a moment, his surroundings disappeared. He stood on a battlefield strewn with the bodies of giants in power armor. Storms raged overhead. A titan lay broken, its head torn off. In the center of the carnage knelt a figure in ornate armor, his chest pierced by a sword. He looked up, eyes full of betrayal and love. He whispered a name the winds carried away. Terrorblade realized he was seeing a memory, the final moments of the Horus heresy when Warmaster Horus fell. This shard belonged not to Horus, but to one of his brothers who had stood nearby, perhaps the noble Sanguinius or the melancholic Rogel Dorn. The memory faded. In its place came a sense of duty that had outlasted death. The shard pulsed with an echo of loyalty to the Emperor. The Emperor, the name held weight. Even in his world, stories of a corpse god's throne reached through the warp. Terrorblade allowed the shard to guide his mind toward that throne. He followed a psychic thread, feeling himself pulled across space. He did not physically travel, his consciousness did. He saw Terra, the throne world of mankind. He saw the palace, a sprawl of towers and defensive lines, more fortress than seat of power. At its heart lay the Golden Throne, a machine of terrible complexity, built to contain the Emperor's shattered body and amplify his psychic presence. Millions of psychers sacrificed themselves to maintain it, their souls fueling the Astronomicon, the beacon by which the Imperium navigated. Through the eyes of the Primarch Shard, he saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a man whose body had been shattered and whose mind had expanded to encompass an empire. He saw a carcass sustained by cables and tubes. He saw a mind that still burned like a star, but that mind was focused on a single task, holding back the warp from devouring humanity. It was stagnant, unmoving, trapped by necessity. He withdrew from the vision. The Golden Throne was both powerful and pathetic. It was the linchpin of the Imperium and also its prison. If he could capture the Emperor's soul, he could reshape reality across galaxies. But the vision had shown him the cost. The Emperor was not simply a man. He was a living god whose sacrifice bound billions. To tear him from the throne would unleash the warp upon humanity. Even he hesitated at the thought of that chaos. The reflection within him whispered caution. There were other souls that would suffice. Primarch fragments, demon princes, Eldar gods bound within stones. The Emperor's soul could wait. He slid the shard back into its casket. He needed to gather more pieces. When he had enough, he could attempt something truly audacious. The vision left him contemplative. He sat on the edge of a broken column and watched the glow of fires in the distance. The hive was a labyrinth of suffering. Above, in spires, nobles feasted while below, mutants starved. Faith held the structure together, but the faith was brittle. He could shatter it, but if he did so prematurely, the resulting collapse would attract every Inquisitor and Space Marine chapter within range. Patience. He needed allies, or at least distractions. The Farseer had given him webway coordinates. Perhaps he would venture to other worlds in the sector, test his strength against different foes. He thought of the Tyranid swarms devouring planets, of Necron tombs awakening. Those conflicts would provide ample souls. He considered the Mechanicus's forges on Mars, the strongholds of the Grey Knights on Titan, the craftworlds drifting through the void. Each was a potential prize. He stood, leaving the alcove. His plan expanded. He would collect fragments of souls and artifacts from across this galaxy. When he returned to Terra, it would be not as a solitary demon, but as a force capable of challenging even the throne. The Primarch Shard pulsed in his armor. The light within it was a reminder of the power of legacy. He tapped it gently, as if to reassure it that its time had not yet come. He moved back into the hive's corridors, his silhouette merging with the shadows. Above, the Astronomicon blazed like a beacon. He smiled softly and continued his hunt. The hunt led him to a place where memory and myth converged. In the heart of Hive Dominus, there was a chamber no longer used by officials, a shrine dedicated to the Primarchs. It had been built in the early days of the Imperium, before bureaucracy choked the city's arteries. Dust coated the statues, yet candles still burned at their feet. Pilgrims occasionally snuck in to whisper prayers to heroes long gone. Terrorblade entered, his footsteps echoing. He saw 18 pedestals arranged in a circle. On each, a statue of a giant stood, carved from marble and iron. Each wore distinctive armor. Their faces were stern, noble, or cruel, reflecting their legends. He moved from one to the next. The first depicted Lion L. Johnson, his sword raised, cloak flowing. He radiated honor and secrecy. Next was Fulgrim, frozen in a pose of aesthetic perfection, his features beautiful and arrogant. Perturabo stood with a hammer resting on his shoulder, his face set in a grim scowl. Each statue held a story. Magnus, the red statue, had been defaced. His head had been struck off, an act of spite for his perceived betrayal. Horus's pedestal was empty. Two statues were deliberately obscured, their features chiseled away. These were the lost Primarchs, their existence erased from records. The emptiness tugged at Terrorblade's curiosity. What souls had been removed from history? The shrine's silence contained answers he could not yet access. He stood before the statue of Sanguinius. The angelic Primarch's wings spread wide, his face tilted heavenward. He remembered the memory from the shard, the angel falling. Sanguinius's soul, if it still existed, would be a feast. He touched the marble. A faint warmth emanated. Devotion from thousands of pilgrims had imbued the stone with psychic residue. He tasted sorrow and hope. He moved to Rogel Dorn's statue. The imperial fists Primarch held a shield. Duty radiated from the carved lines of his jaw. He sensed stubbornness. He paused at Lemon Russ, the Wolf King, carved mid-roar. The statue smelled faintly of mead. Then he reached Vulcan, who cradled a hammer and flames. Compassion lay beneath his stern gaze. Gilliman's statue was polished, regularly cleaned by unseen hands. Order and pragmatism emanated from it. Angron's pedestal had been shattered and pieced back together clumsily, as if the artisans feared his wrath even in stone. Each statue was a chapter in the Imperium's story. He returned to the two empty pedestals. Names had been chiseled out. No statues remained. According to rumor, these Primarchs had been expunged for crimes unimaginable, or maybe they had failed in ways that shamed the Emperor. The emptiness resonated with him. He had been expelled from daemonic society for breaking laws. He knew what it meant to be erased from memory. He placed his hand on one of the empty plinths. He felt nothing at first, then a faint echo. A soul fragment, perhaps, hidden by those who had removed the statue. It felt like a mirror. He smiled. He would need to investigate further. Perhaps one of the lost Primarch's souls remained somewhere, waiting for someone like him. He could relate to such a being. An alliance or a conquest, time would tell. He sat in the center of the circle, closing his eyes. He let the presence of the statues flow into him. He saw glimpses of battles he had never fought, the siege of Terra, the burning of Prospero, the drop site massacre. He heard the Primarchs' voices raised in argument and laughter. Each fragment was like a line in a poem. He realized that the Imperium's greatest strength and greatest weakness came from these demigods. Their legacies bound the Adeptus Astartes to their traditions. Their absence left holes that festered into superstition and resentment. He opened his eyes. The statues around him seemed to lean forward slightly, as if listening. He spoke softly, blending speech and thought. He would take what they left behind. There were no quotation marks around his words. The utterance was for himself and whatever spirit still lingered. He stood, leaving the shrine. He felt the weight of eons upon his shoulders and did not bow. He left with a new determination. He would seek the lost and broken fragments of these demigods, not just to consume, but perhaps to reshape. His reflection murmured approval. It understood ambition. A soft, emotional handoff accompanied his exit. The candle's flames flickered as he walked past, as if exhaling in unison. The shrine returned to silence, waiting for the next pilgrim who would not know the presence that had just passed. Travel through the hive's underworld eventually led him to a natural fissure in the rock, a crevice through which warp energy bled. It was not a portal to the warp proper, it was a crack where realities kissed. On the other side, he felt not the chaos gods, but something far more familiar. Falfel's mirror glimmered. The reflection he had mastered beckoned. For a moment, he hesitated. He had left Falfel to escape confinement, but the mirror within him remained an integral part of his power. Without communion, it would grow restless. He stepped through the fissure, leaving the material world behind for a space between. Colors inverted, sound became sensation. He stood within a hall of mirrors, each surface reflecting not just his form but versions of himself, some monstrous, some regal, some broken. They whispered in his voice, asking why he dallied in a galaxy that was not his own. They accused him of forgetting the promise made to himself in captivity to rule, not to wander. He walked forward, facing his largest reflection. It stepped out of the mirror and solidified. It looked like him but wore chains forged from eldworm bone. Its eyes were hollow. This was the version of himself that had never mastered Foulfell, that had broken under its torment. It attacked, claws extended. Their clash was silent. No blade struck, but each thought was a blow. The mirrored Terrorblade attempted to drag him back into complacency, to remind him of the comfortable cycles of torment and release. The real Terrorblade countered with memory of his first kill on this new world, of the taste of Imperial blood and the potential of Primarch shards. He countered by reminding his reflection of their shared desire for autonomy. They grappled in a contest of will, each seeking to absorb the other. The fight drew the attention of other reflections. A version of him that had accepted Khorne's offer shouted for him to embrace mindless slaughter. Another, draped in the serpentine robes of Tzeentch, whispered strategies that would ensnare him in endless schemes. He ignored them. This confrontation was about control over his own narrative. He recalled the Farseer's map, the Shard's pulse, the taste of souls in this new galaxy. He used those memories like a blade, slicing through the chains of his weaker self. The chains fell, the hollow-eyed reflection dissolved into mist, rejoining his essence. He felt a surge of clarity. The other reflections faded, their voices reduced to murmurs. He emerged from the fissure back into the hive, feeling stronger. Reintegrating, his reflection had not only reaffirmed his autonomy, but had deepened his understanding of his own nature. The mirror within him was not a weakness, it was a reservoir. Whenever he felt doubt, he could consult it. Whenever he needed to absorb a lesson, he could fight a version of himself and emerge refined. The warp gods had tempted him, and he had refused. His own reflection had challenged him, and he had prevailed. This pattern reinforced his belief that his greatest adversary was always himself. That understanding granted him stability in a galaxy defined by chaos. The fissure closed behind him, sealing with a whisper. He stood once more in a maintenance tunnel lined with pipes and leaking coolant. His hand brushed the rough wall, grounding himself in reality. The ambient hum of generators and the distant rumble of artillery anchored him. His reflection whispered approval, not as an antagonist but as a partner. Together, they would pursue the souls needed to reshape existence. He continued walking, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. The encounter had cost him nothing but time. It had given him focus. As he climbed a ladder toward the upper hive, he felt the Primarch shard in his armor pulse. Outside, the war between Imperial Guard and Chaos cultists intensified. He moved toward the noise, ready to harvest more souls. The memory of the mirror duel remained, a quiet lesson to carry forward. The handoff between his inner world and the outer battlefield was smooth. There was no jarring transition, only a continuous flow from introspection to action. News of a demon that defied classification and resisted banishment spread quickly through the Imperium's hierarchies. On the fortress world of Titan, home of the Grey Knights, data scrolls were unfurled, and prognosticars consulted the Emperor's tarot. The Grey Knights were the Emperor's psychic paladins, engineered to fight demons with purity unmatched. Each bore wards in his flesh and mind, his soul shielded by sigils etched by the Emperor himself. When rumors reached them of a demon that eluded inquisitorial detection and corrupted Mechanicus code without leaving a trace, they considered it blasphemy to ignore. Grand Master Avestus convened a strike force. Nemesis force halberds were blessed, and storm bolters loaded with silver-banded shells. Their thunderhawks screamed through the void toward Morsha's prime, carrying a squad of warriors whose minds were fortified against the warp's whispers. Terrorblade felt their approach hours before the Thunderhawk pierced the atmosphere. Psychic presence like cold steel announced their arrival. Grey Knights were different from the Psykers he had encountered. Their thoughts were disciplined, their faith more than zealotry. It was a lifeline to an emperor they believed still watched over them. They did not fear the warp, they waded into it like champions. He had never fought the Grey Knights before. Curiosity stirred. Would their purity pierce his reflection? Would their wards deflect his metamorph? He decided to test them. The strike force landed in the ruins of a chapel, their boots crushing mosaic tiles. Brother Captain Marius extended his mind, sweeping for demonic taint. He sensed echoes but no source. He ordered his squad to spread out. Their Terminator armor thudded against marble. Incense lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of ozone from their teleportation. Suddenly, a figure emerged from shadows, not monstrous but human-sized, clad in dark armor that absorbed light. Marius raised his halberd, reciting a litany of banishment. The squad formed a semicircle, storm bolters leveled. Terrorblade stood at a distance, letting them see him clearly. He wanted to gauge their response. Their eyes behind visors narrowed, their psychic defenses flared. He felt their minds brush his, testing for corruption. He allowed them a glimpse. They saw his origin, Foulfell's mirror, his mastery over reflection, the souls he had harvested. They did not see allegiance to a chaos god. Marius's mind recoiled slightly. This was not a demon of the warp, it was something else. The captain spoke, his voice like granite. He declared that all unbound entities must submit to the Emperor's judgment. He stepped forward, halberd at the ready. Terrorblade smiled without humor. He drew his blade slowly, not to threaten but to show respect. He knew these warriors would not be swayed by whispers or promises. Their souls would be difficult to harvest, but the challenge itself was intriguing. He lunged. The first clash sent a shockwave through the chapel. His blade met a nemesis halberd. Sparks flew. A psychic backlash rippled, statues cracking. Grey Knights moved with surprising speed despite their armor. Storm bolters spat purifying bolts. He deflected them with his blade or allowed them to glance off his armor, which hissed where silver met demonic skin. Their psychic wards bit at his essence. He felt mild discomfort, like ice water on skin. It was more invigorating than painful. He conjured clones, but the Grey Knights saw through them. Their warp sight pierced his illusion, targeting his true self. He shifted into metamorph form, wings spreading to fill the chapel's nave. His cleaver met halberds. He lifted Brother Sergeant Uriel with a telekinetic grip, but the Grey Knight's wards crackled and broke his hold. A Justicar chanted the Emperor's name, channeling power through his blade. It cut a thin line across Terrorblade's shoulder. The wound smoked. He felt a sting and then warmth. It had been ages since a weapon truly hurt him. He laughed, a deep sound that echoed through the chapel, not mocking, joyful, a worthy opponent. The duel intensified. Psychic powers clashed. He unleashed force lightning. They responded with psychic barriers formed from scripture. He attempted to sunder, but their armor prevented health transfer. They struck at his reflection with Librarian Orin's mind blade, attempting to sever his connection to Foulfell. For a moment, he felt his internal mirror shake. He reinforced it with will and memory. He saw in their minds their training on Titan, purity seals burned into flesh, names of demons memorized and eradicated. He respected their dedication. He also saw glimpses of doubt, tiny cracks where exhaustion and frustration lived. He exploited them, pressing when their formation wavered. One by one, he scored hits, each blow tasting of holy oil and blood. Battle could have continued for hours, but he did not need to annihilate them. He wished to learn. He withdrew suddenly, his form shrinking back to human proportions. He saluted with his blade, a gesture not of mockery but of acknowledgement. Then he vanished into shadow, leaving behind the faint scent of brimstone. The Grey Knights did not pursue. They tended to their wounded, minds racing. They had not banished the entity, but neither had it overwhelmed them. It had fought like a warrior, not a beast. They reported back to Titan with caution. A new player was in the galaxy, one who did not fall into existing categories. Marius wondered whether to classify him as enemy or potential tool. Terrorblade carried away fresh scars that tingled with holy energy. They would fade, but he would remember this encounter. The soft emotional handoff after the clash was a quiet respect between foes who acknowledged each other's strength without words. He resumed his hunt with new insight into the Imperium's elite. The Ghoul sector's wars were constant. Each week saw a new uprising, a new invasion, a new crusade. Souls flowed like rivers into the warp. Terrorblade moved toward the largest source of psychic noise he sensed, a battle between an Imperial armored column and a horde of chaos cultists backed by demon engines. The location was the ruins of an ancient city-turned-battlefield. Craters pocked the streets, towers burned. Civilians hid in basements while banners of skulls and chains flapped from shattered balconies. The smell of blood mixed with the tang of ash. Above, vultures circled, their feathers singed. He climbed onto a broken statue of a saint to survey the scene. On one side, lemon rust tanks rumbled forward, their tracks grinding over rubble. Heavy bolter sponsons stitched death across ranks of cultists. Basilisks fired from behind, shells screaming overhead to crater the enemy. Infantry advanced alongside, lasguns flashing. Commissars bellowed orders, their pistols ready to execute cowards. On the other, cultists clad in rusted armor chanted praises to dark gods. They carried stubbers and autoguns. They were expendable. Behind them lumbered demon engines, defilers with spider-like legs and jaws dripping ichor, mauler fiends that punched through hab blocks, hellbrutes dragging flayed corpses behind them. The air crackled with warp energy. Fire and smoke obscured shapes. Screams and explosions blended into a constant roar. Terrorblade descended from his perch and entered the fray. He did not take sides, he sought souls. He moved along the edge of the battlefield, harvesting where he could. A guardsman fell with a scream, his soul rising. Terrorblade caught it, tasting the man's last thoughts, a prayer for his wife and children. He whispered, "Let that prayer guide you and consume the essence." A cultist charged, face twisted by mutation. Terrorblade beheaded him. His soul tasted of fanaticism and regret. He took it. He moved toward the demon engines. Their souls were not mortal, but amalgamations of bound demons. Killing them would yield powerful fragments. He conjured clones to distract hellbrutes, sending them running in circles. He shifted into metamorph form, wings unfurled, horns gleaming. A defiler turned its battle cannon toward him. It fired. He swatted the shell aside, letting it detonate against a building. He leaped onto the engine's carapace, driving his blade into its armored hide. The demon inside roared in rage and pain. He felt its essence resisting extraction. He grasped with both hands and pulled. Souls shrieked as they were freed. He devoured them, feeling his power spike. The engine collapsed. Nearby, a mauler fiend lunged, its claws tearing through air. He sidestepped, slicing through a tendon. It stumbled. Guardsmen cheered, thinking their crack missiles had done the work. He allowed them the illusion. He moved on, leaving a trail of smoking wreckage. The battle swayed. Chaos forces surged when a dark apostle appeared, chanting litanies that bolstered cultist bravery. His Crozius crackled with warp fire. He pointed at Terrorblade, recognizing a being not aligned with his gods. He shouted a challenge. The cultists charged. Terrorblade sighed inwardly. He did not wish to waste time, but the souls were right there. He met the rush, blades swinging in arcs that decapitated, dismembered, eviscerated. He whispered into minds, sowing doubt. Some cultists turned and fled. The dark apostle roared, striking with his Crozius. The blow sent sparks across Terrorblade's armor. He countered by reaching into the man's mind. He saw the apostles past. A preacher once loyal, turned by despair when the emperor did not answer his prayers. He whispered, "You still serve a corpse, only a different one." The apostle hesitated. Terrorblade's blade cut him in two. His soul tasted of bitterness. He consumed it and moved on. The Imperial lines pushed forward, armor-crushing corpses. Commissars executed those who faltered. Terrorblade considered taking a commissar's soul, but their minds were monolithic. He turned instead to a group of psychers on the Imperial flank. They channeled lightning into the enemy, eyes rolled back. They were vulnerable. He reached out, brushing their souls. Their power was wild, barely controlled. He harvested gently, taking slivers. They gasped. Their lightning faltered. Daemonets burst from a tier in reality near them, drawn by their laps. Guardsmen panicked. He watched, collecting souls from both sides. The warp rippled as more demons manifested. He enjoyed the chaos, though he remained separate. As the day wore on, the battle reached a climax. The last demon engine exploded, showering gore across the street. The Imperial tanks rolled over the cultists, their treads slick with blood. The survivors fled. Terrorblade stood amid the carnage, his armor dripping with ichor. He looked up at the smoke-choked sky. Souls whirled around him, waiting to be devoured. He opened himself, drawing them in. Each added to his strength. He did not feel pity or satisfaction. He felt purpose. The battle had been a harvest. When it ended, he stepped aside as medici teams arrived, as priests recited rites for the dead. None saw him. He faded into the ruins, leaving behind a field of corpses and an imperceptible vacuum where souls should have lingered. The emotional handoff from battle to quiet was gradual, a tapering off of noise until only distant artillery remained. He moved on, seeking the next source of souls, the next opportunity to shape fate. Days of travel through the hive brought Terrorblade to a place of solemn grandeur. Built atop the ruins of an older church, this cathedral was a fortress and a sanctuary. Its Gothic arches stretched skyward, piercing the smog to reveal glimpses of stars. Flying buttresses bristled with heavy bolters and auto turrets. Stained glass windows depicted saints and martyrs bathed in light. Inside, the nave could hold thousands. Today it held hundreds, refugees from the lower levels, soldiers on leave, nobles seeking absolution. Candles burned in niches, incense filled the air. Choirs sang hymns in high Gothic. The atmosphere was heavy with reverence and exhaustion. Terrorblade entered through a side door, moving along shadowed colonnades. He watched as a priest in ornate vestments spoke from the pulpit. The priest's voice rolled like thunder. He told tales of the emperor's sacrifices, of saints who had faced down demons with faith alone. He invoked the names of primarchs as paragons to emulate. His words carried the cadence of ritual, but under the surface, Terrorblade sensed desperation. The priest's soul flickered with doubt. He had seen things that did not fit his teachings. He feared what would happen if the emperor's light dimmed. Yet he spoke because faith was all he had to offer the flock. Among the congregation sat members of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. Their power armor polished, fleur-de-lis embossed on their breastplates, they sang with voices that could cut through the din of war. Their faith burned bright, a beacon in the warp. One sister, younger than the rest, knelt apart, head bowed. Her thoughts were a prayer and a question, how to balance compassion and violence. Terrorblade watched her for a long moment. Her soul was like tempered steel wrapped in silk. He could not reach it easily. He considered leaving a whisper in her mind, but chose not to. He was not yet ready to test the Emperor's most devoted daughters. He moved closer to the altar. Behind it, an aquila made of gold hung suspended. Beneath it, relics were displayed, bones of martyrs, shards of banners, a bolt pistol said to have been used by a saint. Pilgrims lined up to touch the reliquaries. Their hands trembled. Their souls flared with momentary hope. Terrorblade reached out, brushing those souls as they passed. He tasted hope and guilt, love and hatred. He took nothing, only sampled. He wanted to understand why these mortals clung to faith. He realized that faith here was not about reward, it was about structure. In a universe of chaos, it provided a pattern. If he wanted to reshape reality, he would need to offer a pattern just as compelling. At the cathedral's edge, an older priest knelt before a mural showing the emperor at the center of a halo of light. He whispered to the mural, confessing his fear that his sermons no longer stirred hearts. Terrorblade approached silently and stood beside him. He let the priest feel his presence. The priest looked up, eyes widening as he saw a dark figure with no reflection in the candlelight. He did not cry out. He asked, as if to himself, "What are you?" Terrorblade answered without moving his lips. I am change and consequence. The words entered the priest's mind like a wind. The priest nodded slowly, more curious than afraid. He said he had been told that demons lied. Terrorblade agreed. He said he lied when it suited him. He also told truths when they served his purpose. He told the priest that the Imperium was stagnant and that stagnation led to death. The priest looked back at the mural, at the Emperor's stern gaze. He murmured that perhaps death was preferable to chaos. Terrorblade left him with that thought, an ember that would either extinguish or ignite. He exited the cathedral through a side chapel dedicated to an obscure martyr. On the wall, a fresco showed a warrior falling before a tyrant. The inscription spoke of sacrifice. Terrorblade paused, fingers tracing the painted face. He thought of his own sacrifices, the centuries in Falfell, the souls consumed, the alliances formed and broken. He wondered if he could inspire such devotion. He turned away. Outside, the war continued. The cathedral's bells tolled, calling the faithful to prayer, calling the lost to repentance. He vanished into an alley, leaving behind the echo of an unspoken question. What would faith look like if it were placed in something that admitted its darkness openly? The emotional transition from Sacred Hall to soot-covered street was smooth, a gentle descent from incense to smoke. He breathed deeply and moved on. Word of Terrorblade's actions spread beyond Morsha's prime. In the Eye of Terror, among the fleets of the damned, a chaos lord named Varkos heard rumors of a demon who refused the gods. Varkos had once been a loyal space marine captain of the Iron Warriors, a master of siegecraft. 10,000 years of war had twisted him into a creature of iron and spite. He wore armor fused with demon flesh, his heart replaced by a warp-infused engine. He sought worthy foes to feed his arrogance. He desired to prove that no entity, not even a demon from another reality, could deny chaos. He gathered his warband and set course for Morsha's prime. On the way, he bound a demon prince to his will, promising to feed its souls. He arrived during the lull between battles, descending upon the hive in drop pods that struck like meteors. Terrorblade felt his arrival as a pressure against the warp. He sensed not only the warband soldiers, but their leaders' hunger for validation. He decided to meet this challenge. He stood on a ruined plaza, Primarch shard pulsing under his armor, reflection humming with anticipation. The sky burned as Varkos descended, his Terminator-clad form impacting the ground, cracking tiles. Around him, Iron Warriors veterans deployed, bolters ready, eyes scanning. Mutated servitors dragged heavy weapons into position. Demon engines snarled. Varkos's presence was palpable, a mixture of iron discipline and seething hatred. The Chaos Lord stepped forward, chainfist whirring, combi-bolter loaded with warp-infused rounds. His voice boomed through Vox speakers. He declared himself the instrument of the god's wrath and called upon the stranger to face him. Terrorblade stepped from the shadows, his armor reflecting firelight. He did not speak. He drew his blade. The duel began. Varkos charged with the weight of a tank. His chain fist swung in a lethal arc. Terrorblade leaped, wings unfurling, dodging the blow. He countered with a slash that sparked against the Chaos Lord's armor, cutting through spikes and glyphs. Varkos laughed, the sound thick with static. He fired his combi-bolter point blank. Bolts exploded against Terrorblade's chest, leaving smoking craters. Pain flared, an unfamiliar sensation since the Grey Nights. He absorbed it, letting it fuel his metamorph. He grew larger, horns curving, scales thickening. His cleaver lengthened. He struck with force that cracked Ferrocrete. The warband cheered, then fell silent as the duel intensified. Varkos activated built-in thrusters, propelling himself forward faster than his bulk suggested possible. He slammed into Terrorblade, driving him back. He tried to grapple. Terrorblade twisted, sliding free, carving deep gashes across the Chaos Lord's torso. Ichor sprayed. Varkos roared. He chanted a prayer to the dark gods, seeking their blessing. For a moment, the warp responded, sending a surge of power through him. His chain fist glowed with balefire. He struck again, severing one of Terrorblade's horns. The horn fell, clattering to the ground. Terrorblade hissed, then laughed. He appreciated the challenge. He reached out with his reflection, tapping into the Primarch shard. He drew upon the loyalty and honor contained within, tempering his fury. He used Sunder, not in its usual health-swapping sense, but as a metaphorical inversion. He transferred the desperation from Varkos's heart into his own calm, and his calm into Varkos. The Chaos Lord staggered. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Terrorblade pressed, blade flashing. He drove Varkos back toward a statue that had long since lost its saint. He saw in Varkos's mind memories of the siege of Terra, of betrayal, of endless war with no victory. He whispered into that mind, "You have been fighting for a lie." Varkos howled, denying it. He swung, desperate. Terrorblade parried and riposted, slicing through power cables feeding the Chaos Lord's armor. Sparks flew. A demon engine attempted to intervene. Terrorblade extended a hand and unleashed a wave of force, sending the engine crashing into a wall. He returned focus to his opponent. He feinted, then drove his blade through Varkos's chest. It pierced armor, flesh, and the warp engine that served as his heart. A burst of energy erupted, forcing both combatants apart. Varkos fell to his knees, ichor pouring from the wound. He looked up at the sky, his eyes wide with confusion. He whispered the names of his gods, seeking aid. None came. The gods did not save failures. Terrorblade stood over him, breathing steadily. He placed a hand on Varkos's helm and pulled his soul free. It resisted, then snapped. The soul tasted of bitterness and siegecraft, of iron walls and broken oaths. He consumed it. The warband watched as their lord's body collapsed into a heap of metal and flesh. Some raised their weapons, others dropped to their knees. Terrorblade sheathed his blade. He told them they were free. Free to follow him, free to flee, free to die. Some chose to attack. He cut them down. Others ran. He let them go. The duel's end sent a ripple through the warp. Chaos gods noticed a champion fall not to a rival demon prince but to an outsider. Some snarled. Others laughed. Terrorblade felt neither triumph nor remorse. The duel had been necessary. It had yielded a powerful soul and proved that even ancient warriors could falter when confronted with their own emptiness. He left the plaza, the image of the fallen Chaos Lord fading behind him. A soft, emotional handoff lingered, a moment of silence where there had been roaring and clashing, as if the plaza itself paused to exhale. With each encounter, Terrorblade's understanding of this galaxy deepened. Battles revealed its brutality. Shrines revealed its devotion. Duelists revealed its pride. Yet nothing prepared him for the realization that came when he stepped through a webway portal given by the Farseer. The webway was a network of tunnels outside normal space, crafted by the Old Ones and maintained by the Eldar. It was a labyrinth of crystal and light, free from the warp's currents. He entered cautiously, the portal closing behind him with a whisper. The passage before him was wide, lined with glowing veins of energy that pulsed with ancient rhythm. He walked, his steps echoing softly. He passed entrances to other tunnels, some sealed, some open, some emanating smells of alien forests or desert winds. He emerged at another portal and stepped onto a cliff overlooking a desolate plain beneath a violet sky. In the distance, Cyclopean pyramids rose from the ground. Necron tomb worlds dotted the horizon, awakening. He felt the silent hatred of machines older than humanity. He retreated. He took another path. This time, he emerged on a space station orbiting a gas giant. The station was ancient, its architecture pre-imperial. Orcs had claimed it. He heard their boisterous laughter and the roar of their engines. He returned to the webway. Another path took him to an Eldar craft world, visible only as a shimmering sphere. He did not intrude. He moved on. He saw glimpses of Tyrannid hive fleets, Tyrannid spores drifting like pollen, devouring moons. He saw a Black Templar crusade battling heretics in a void fortress. He saw Mechanicus explorators excavating an STC on a barren world. He realized the scale of this galaxy. It was not just the Imperium and chaos. It was a tapestry of empires and species, each with its own history and soul. He understood then that to reshape reality here would be far more complex than he had imagined. Falfel's mirror and the shards he gathered were powerful, but they might not suffice to overcome billions of souls and the will of ancient gods. He needed allies, or at least distractions. He considered forging pacts with Xenos. Eldar Farseers could guide him along threads of fate. He pondered awakening Necron lords with promises of purpose beyond their tombs. He thought of orc warlords, easily manipulated by the promise of endless WAGH. He considered freeing a Citan shard, though that was dangerous. He weighed approaching the Silent King, who sought to restore his race. Each option opened new strands of possibility. He began to see his role not just as a devourer, but as a catalyst. If he could tilt the balance of power, he could create chaos that obscured his true aim. His reflection showed him images of possible futures, one where he allied with an Eldar corsair to steal a relic from a Chaos fortress, another where he manipulated an imperial governor into declaring independence, triggering civil war. He saw himself harvesting souls on a tyrannid world, using the swarm's deaths to amplify his power. He saw himself standing before the Golden Throne, a legion of souls behind him. The possibilities were dizzying. He realized he could not pursue them all. He needed to choose a path. He decided to prioritize gathering more Primarch fragments and powerful souls. Without them, he was formidable but not invincible. With them, he could become a force that even the gods would have to reckon with. He returned to the webway and selected a path that led back to the ghoul sector. As he walked, he thought of infinity. In Foulfell, time and space were twisted, but the scale was limited. Here, infinity was real. It spanned millions of worlds and billions of years. He felt both exhilarated and small. His reflection offered comfort. It reminded him that even infinite spaces could be reshaped by careful application of power. He needed to be patient. He needed to expand his influence slowly but steadily. He stepped out of the webway onto a barren plateau not far from Morsha's prime. The sky was clear. The stars were bright. He looked up, seeing not just points of light, but potential stages for his next acts. He breathed deeply, tasting the dust of a world yet to be ravaged. He smiled. The emotional transition was subtle, a shift from awe to determination. He set off toward a new goal, his mind filled with plans that spanned beyond a single world or sector. The Primarch shard pulsed with increasing intensity as Terrorblade gathered more souls. He had collected echoes of long-dead warriors, fragments of noble spirits, and the bitter residue of traitors. He sensed that the shard was close to awakening something within him. He returned to the fissure where he had fought his reflection. This time, he stepped through with a purpose not of confrontation, but of integration. Inside the mirrored hall, he laid out the shard, the souls he had harvested swirling like mist above it. He sat cross-legged, his reflection across from him. They mirrored each other perfectly. He began to weave. He drew the souls into patterns, threads crossing and intertwining. He connected them to the shard, binding them with lines of force drawn from his reflection. It was like weaving a tapestry made of light and shadow. Each soul became a node, each memory a strand. He recalled the Primarch shrine, the empty pedestals, the flames flickering in silence. He remembered the Grey Knight's determination, the Farseer's bargain, the Chaos Lord's fall. He wove those memories into the structure. He felt his essence stretching, expanding. The Hall of Mirrors reflected not just him, but the tapestry itself, echoing endless versions of the pattern. His reflection guided him, reminding him which strands to tighten and which to leave loose. As the tapestry neared completion, he felt something stir in the shard, a presence, faint but distinct. It was not a consciousness like his. It was a memory of leadership, of sacrifice, of building empires. It pulsed in time with his own dark heart. He reached out mentally. The presence did not speak, but it acknowledged him. It asked in sensation why he had gathered its fragment. He answered by sharing his vision, a reality where souls were not bound by a stagnant emperor, where power did not rely on gods who consumed without creating, where beings could shape their fate through will. The presence did not agree or disagree. It simply was. It allowed itself to be integrated into the tapestry, adding its strength to his. The integration completed, the tapestry wrapped around the shard and his reflection. It fused into his essence. He felt his power swell. The metamorph within him shuddered. His horns lengthened further, his wings darkened. His eyes burned brighter. He sensed a new layer of influence. He could now touch not just individual souls, but the bonds between them. He could pluck at the connections that tied guardsmen to their commissars, sisters to their saints, cultists to their dark apostles. He could strengthen or weaken those bonds. He realized this was a new form of control, a way to reshape not just individuals but communities. The reflection within him smiled, satisfied. He left the mirror hall and returned to reality. On the plateau outside the hive, he tested his new ability. He reached toward a squad of guardsmen drilling. He strengthened the bond between them and their sergeant, watching their movements align more perfectly. He then loosened the bond between another group and their commissar. The commissar barked orders. The soldiers hesitated a fraction. He nodded. He would use this ability sparingly. Subtlety was key. He would use it to sow dissent or forge allegiance where needed. He thought of the lost Primarch plinths and wondered if he could restore a bond to a forgotten gene line. The possibilities expanded once more. Ascension no longer seemed like a distant concept. It felt like a process already underway. He understood that ascending did not mean reaching a throne or a title. It meant weaving oneself into the fabric of reality so thoroughly that one became a locus of influence. He had begun. He would continue by seeking more shards, more souls. He would visit other worlds, other dimensions if necessary. He would remain cautious, for the warp gods watched, and the Inquisition sharpened its knives. He folded his wings around him like a cloak and sat beneath the stars, contemplating his next moves. The plateau was quiet save for the whisper of wind. The emotional handoff was gentle, a fading of tension into contemplation, as if the world itself recognized the pause before a storm. He allowed himself a moment of stillness, then rose. There was work to be done. Rumors reached Terrorblade of a being whose soul might rival a Primarch's. A fragment of the demon Primarch Angron's spirit had manifested on a world ravaged by war. Angron's soul, torn by rage and pain, wandered, causing those near its manifestation to succumb to murderous fury. The Imperium had quarantined the world, but Chaos Warbands sought to claim the fragment. If he captured it, he would gain a piece of a demigod whose anger had toppled cities. He traveled via webway, emerging onto a blasted landscape under a sky of perpetual twilight. Volcanoes belched smoke. Rivers of lava cut through black stone. In the distance, a fortress made of skulls and iron loomed, built by cultists to house the fragment. He approached quietly. The fortress's gates were guarded by berserkers of Khorne, warriors driven mad by implants and worship. They fought each other when no enemy was present. He slid past them, cloaking his presence. Inside, the air vibrated with rage. The fragment of Angron's soul hovered above an altar of brass, a crimson orb pulsing like a heart. Cultists knelt before it, cutting themselves, their blood feeding the orb. Demonettes danced, their claws dripping. A demon prince watched, his eyes glowing with anticipation. It was he who would consume the fragment to please Khorne. Terrorblade considered engaging directly. Instead, he waited. The ritual intensified. The demon prince stepped forward, claws outstretched. He recited litanies of anger. The orb flared. The souls in the room trembled. Terrorblade acted. He stepped out, unleashing force lightning that crackled through cultists and demons alike. Bodies spasmed and fell. The demon prince roared and charged, massive wings buffeting the air. Terrorblade met him with metamorph strength. Blades clashed. He dodged claws, striking at exposed flesh. He felt the prince's fury as a heat that singed his armor. He remembered Varkos's desperation and used it. He whispered into the prince's mind that Khorne would never love him, that he was a pawn. The prince faltered. Terrorblade drove his blade through the demon's chest. Warp ichor erupted. The prince's form collapsed into smoke, his soul scattering. He turned to the orb. It pulsed violently, sensing the loss of its guardian. He reached out. It resisted, sending waves of rage into him. He felt Angron's memories, gladiatorial pits on Nuceria, chains that cut into bone, nails hammered into skulls. He tasted endless pain. He held on, drawing the orb toward him. It burned. His reflection intervened, absorbing some of the fury. Slowly, he pulled the orb into his hand. He felt Angron's roar inside him, an endless scream. He swallowed it, forcing it into the tapestry woven around the Primarch shard. The rage thrashed, then settled, bound by his will. He had captured a fragment of a demon Primarch. The fortress shook. Outside, berserkers sensed their patron's essence being stolen. They howled and charged. Terrorblade exited the sanctum, blade dripping. He used his new bond control ability, loosening the berserkers' loyalty to Khorne, strengthening their individual self-preservation. They hesitated. He used that moment to take flight, wings beating hot air. He left the fortress as it began to collapse, the ritual undone. Volcanoes erupted more violently, as if the world itself raged. He ascended into the smoky sky, the fragments secure within him. He flew to a mountain ridge and landed, watching the fortress sink into magma. The fragments' rage hummed within his soul tapestry. It did not dominate, it added a fierce note. He realized that collecting such souls would make him unpredictable. If he did not maintain control, he could become what he fought. He meditated, weaving the rage into a controlled burn that fueled his determination. He thought about the Emperor, bound to the golden throne by duty. He thought about Angron, bound by nails and rage. He thought about himself, bound by ambition. In the end, each being was defined by what bound them. He intended to choose his bonds consciously. As the fortress disappeared beneath lava, he felt eyes upon him. The warp gods watched, intrigued and wary. The Inquisition searched, fearful. Eldar seers whispered, concerned. He stood alone on a ridge, a silhouette against a blood-red horizon. He did not fear their attention. He had become a shadow moving between realities, absorbing strength from every encounter. The galaxy was vast, and his journey had only begun. He turned away from the burning fortress and began to walk. Each step carried the weight of souls and the promise of change. The wind carried ash across his path. The final emotional handoff was gentle, a fading of volcanic fury into the steady rhythm of his footsteps and the soft murmur of his reflection. In that quiet, he whispered to himself that eternity was not a destination, but a process. He would continue that process across stars and beyond, until reality itself reflected his will. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.